Hello, and thank you for being here. My name is Father Charles Vavonese. I'm the Director of the Public Policy Office for the Diocese of Syracuse. Today we're preparing a training tape for those people who will participate with us in the March 19th Catholics in the Capital Day in Albany. I'm here this morning with some of the students from Bishop Grimes High School to prepare this instructional video for you. The students from Bishop Grimes have long participated in the public policy days over the years, and they do an exceptional job in terms of their presence and their witness to our legislators. So I thank their coordinator, Mrs. Julie Moss, and I also thank the students that come with us each year for participating. And I'd like to thank those of you who will view this video for your time and for your effort. Certainly, not only our message, but our witness by our physical presence is important to the people of the state of New York. As I mentioned, we are preparing for Catholics in the Capitol. That's our day. And by the way, when you get to the Capitol and you go to the registration booth, they will give you a large red button. Please put the button on, because what we'd like to do is also make a visual impact to all of the many people, though there will be other groups of people who will be holding these types of public policy days or lobbying days in the Capitol at the same time that we will. Also, we'd like to kind of stand out in terms of the media will be there and just get a sense of how many Catholics are that committed to take a day and go to Albany to convince our legislators the things that are important for the people of the state of New York. All right, Catholics in the Capitol, what is it? Basically, it's an opportunity for us to meet with our legislators and talk about spending priorities. How are they going to spend the money? Now, we all know that there are only so many tax dollars that are collected. When that happens, we have to make priority decisions as to what types of things are more important than others. And we have a system of doing that given coming from the principles of social justice for the church, and we will be able to explain that to you later on in the video. We're looking at proposed legislation, and specifically, we're looking at the bishop's targeted objectives. There are 5 targeted objectives that we will get to later. These are the reasons that we're there. Everyone that comes to Albany will meet with the legislators, discuss their issues, but they discuss the issues around these 5 targeted objectives. All right, how did we get here as a church? First of all, I would ask you to go back to the Old Testament. And as you remember, there were not a lot of social services agencies at the time. So the religious people of the time continually called the rest of society to care for the vulnerable in their midst. Now, in the book of Deuteronomy, the second book of the Hebrew Scriptures, God calls the people to protect the rights of the alien, the orphan, and the widows 4 times in 6 verses. Several of the prophets were very strong in terms of speaking out on behalf of justice, on behalf of social justice: Amos, Jeremiah, Isaiah. So from our Hebrew scripture days, from our Hebrew tradition, we have that foundation. In our own New Testament, numerous. Probably the one that is that's the easiest to point to is the last judgment that is described in Matthew chapter 25. And if any of you have ever been to St. Peter's in Rome, in the Sistine Chapel, you will see a depiction of the Last Judgment. And it talks about the people on the left and the people on the right. And the question becomes, when did we minister to you? And Jesus says, whatever you did for the least of my brothers, that you did for me. So we talk about giving food to the hungry, drink to the thirsty, welcoming the stranger, clothing the naked, and visiting the imprisoned. The theme that runs through this is how we treat other people. Now that comes from our religious tradition, And that's our motivation. Frequently, some of the legislators will say, well, you know, religious people should stay out of politics. No way. We're citizens, so we have a right to be there. What we're focusing on is not doctrine like the Trinity. What we're focusing on is how government, how society treats other people. And that's certainly fair game for anyone. What our motivation is everyone has their own individual motivation, but we're looking at objective acts that focus on how it is that we treat other people. We also have the witness of the saints. St. Vincent de Paul is probably one of the most important, most visible from France. In fact, in Syracuse, we have a St. Vincent de Paul Society that does activities that take care of the poor. John Bosco, Francis de Sales, Martin de Porres, and our own St. Marianne Cope. Mother Marianne, as you know, left Syracuse in the 1850s to go and work with the lepers in Molokai and spent the rest of her life ministering to them. And the Sisters of St. Francis continued the mission in Molokai until, I believe it was 1979, when it was no longer needed due to the fact that we have effective treatment for Hansen's disease, what we frequently refer to as leprosy. So we have all of the tradition of our saints who are presenting that to us. Even in the United States, social change has been brought about by people of religious commitment. If you think about the abolitionist movement and the civil rights movement of the 1960s, in each of these cases, the religious people in the forefront of those movements brought it about, and they were the people who precipitated it happening. Martin Luther King Jr. and so many others who were there to kind of call the people, much like the Old Testament prophets, to care for the vulnerable, however they may be. We have the teachings of the church in our social teachings, which come through very clearly in the papal encyclicals. There's a statement of the American bishops in which they talk about how our Catholic population should interact and should live a life of faithful citizenship. And it speaks of the church having the right and obligation and opportunity to participate in society. And when we participate, a caveat under that is don't abandon your moral principles. In other words, bring those moral principles to the public square and advance them. Catholics in the Capitol is an amazing activity. It's an expression of the larger church. You will have a feel for the Catholic Church in the state of New York when you get there. We will join Bishop Cunningham and the other bishops and the Cardinal, all of the bishops of New York State, to meet with legislators and lobby them. The bishops and the Cardinal will meet with the governor the day before. And at the end of this day, we will gather in the Cathedral of Albany to celebrate a Mass. And it just gives you a sense of the universality of the church. And it's not just one diocese, but at least 1,000 people strong who've taken the time, who've been willing to take a personal day or whatever they had to do to come and speak with legislators about their need to take care of those people who can't take care of themselves. I think the day also is a witness to the Catholic community's investment. Just how strongly do we hold this? I mean, we're willing to pay for the rental of the buildings in Albany, the transportation, and all of these things, and all of the person efforts, including your own, to come to Albany. So what that says is these people are walking the talk. What that converts to is they're worthy of you listening to them. All right, we're fostering the common good, looking to foster what's good for all of society. We're not just looking for ourselves. And the fact that Marshall McLuhan many years ago said the medium is the message. The fact that you're there, your presence, your commitment is basically saying to all the people of New York who will see this. Typically, it's not uncommon for the video feed to go to the dioceses, the news centers of the various dioceses of New York. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that this might be broadcast on Syracuse TV. And so everyone who sees that footage sees how strongly you and the other Catholics in our community across the state are concerned about making a better place to live, making New York State a better place to live for all of its citizens. All right, what are we there to do? Basically, we're there to educate legislators. All right, they have information from a variety of sources. We bring a unique source. We bring a unique dimension to that conversation. We have our expertise. We do a lot of social services. In fact, the reason that Catholic Charities and many other religious groups provide social services and have contracts with the government is because we can do it more efficiently, more economically, and with greater drive. So we have a whole sense of expertise that we bring to that discussion. If you think about it, in terms of medical care, St. Joseph's Hospital and St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Utica were two of the first 50 hospitals in the United States. So way back in the mid-1800s, we were at the forefront of providing medical care for the people of central New York and in the Mohawk Valley, regardless of race, creed, religion. We were there tending to the sick as Jesus tells us to do. Our vocation is to be a light for the world. In other words, to make clear some of the things that happen. In other words, being able to say, here's something you may not have thought about. Or this is something when you're making your decision as to how you're going to vote. This is something that I think is important that you consider. We participate in the democratic process because we're citizens. Please don't let anyone tell you because you're from a religious group you have no business being in the democratic process. You certainly do. You are citizens of the United States, you're citizens of the state of New York, and you have just as much right as anybody else to be there. And you are just exercising that right. We provide a valuable service, and what we do is we improve the quality of the decisions by bringing the moral aspect to bear. Okay, what does this decision, what does this proposal do to people in New York State? It may make perfect financial sense, but if it hurts people, then maybe we need to tell the legislators that people are more important than cash. Now, I realize there are many times when we have to do a balancing act because we can't just operate in a vacuum. But nonetheless, when those things happen, we need to know what trade-offs are taking place. What is lobbying then? First time I went, I had a sense that lobbying was kind of like a mystical ritual. And my concern was, am I going to do it right? Well, lobbying is exactly what we're doing. It is meeting with legislators to talk about proposed legislation and to talk about the various dimensions of the proposed legislation. Good question is, where did the word come from? Now, in many former careers, I was a social studies teacher. I used to teach American history. The word lobbying comes from the fact that when legislators went to the legislative chambers, from the door to the door of the chambers, the door of the building to the door of the chambers, was the lobby. So people would come up to them in the lobby and say, we need you to think about this when you're considering that legislation. So that's where the word came from. Right now, for the most part, we won't be meeting them in the lobby. We'll be meeting them in their offices, or some of you may end up going to the either the Senate or the Assembly sessions. But we will be doing that same thing. And once you realize what lobbying really means, it becomes a whole lot less scary. It's just an opportunity to speak with those legislators who ultimately make the decision. Frequently, we will refer to this as the ministry of advocacy or advocacy ministry, advocating on behalf of those who don't have a voice, advocating on behalf of the common good of the state of New York. Where do we start? Good point. I think we look at the Gospel of St. John and it says, I came that they might have life and have it to the full. Clearly, underlying all of our efforts is the fact that we want people, one, to be able to live, and two, to be able to live well, that life to the full. We also recognize that we are made in the image and likeness of God, and so are all the other people with whom we live. And all of those people, ourselves and others, deserve to be treated as though they were created in the image and likeness of God. They're not things. They're not disposable issues. How is it, and we began talking about this earlier, how do the bishops decide which issues get their attention? All right, in the American Bishop's Statement, that document that I quoted earlier, Faithful Citizenship, they write this: we believe that every proposal, policy, and political practice must be measured by how it touches the human person and how it contributes to the common good. So the two things we look at is, what does it do to people and what does it do to society? And that's all we're there to talk about. Catholic social teaching, very interesting, because it's not conservative or liberal. Sometimes we're on either side of the fence there. Sometimes it's politically incorrect, but it's always faithful to the gospel, because it's not about one agenda or another. It's about the gospel. It's only about the gospel agenda, and sometimes that's going to fit into labels like conservative or liberal. Sometimes it's not, but whatever we do has to always be consistent to the call of the gospel. As a guide for Catholics, we suggest that we need to speak out of our moral convictions. What is it that we believe is how people treat other people? Is it fair to let them steal? Most people would say private property is a right. Therefore, the state has an obligation to protect the property of individuals. And we go through applying each and everything in that manner, how it affects the individual and how it affects society. All right, we're not operating out of our own self-interest, and we're not attached to any political party or particular interest groups. Many of the other folks who will be there lobbying with you on March 19th are part of either an interest group or a political party. We're not. We're there because what binds us together is the gospel of Jesus Christ. I came that they might have life and have it to the full. We spoke earlier about the principles of social justice that the American bishops use, and I'm just going to run through them quickly. The first is life, the life and dignity of human persons. Excuse me. And if you notice, I put an extra space here because I wanted to set that one aside. Basically, what I want to say is that this is the key issue. If you think about it, all of these issues are about quality of life. If someone doesn't have life, none of the quality of life issues matter. So clearly this not only has to be first, but it has to be set apart in our mind as this is the most focal issue. And a lot of people, it's not uncommon for a legislator to say to you, well, the human life issue is only one issue. It's one issue, but it's the critical issue. And that's the response that we need to come to. I think they will be surprised if you respond to them by saying, you know, all of those other things are quality of life issues. If you have no life, it doesn't matter. It absolutely doesn't matter. We look at the call to family, community, and participation. We look at rights and responsibilities. We realize that citizens have rights. At the same time, we also realize that citizens have responsibilities and they need to live up to those. We're concerned about the option for the poor and the vulnerable. As we mentioned earlier, the Constitution of the state of New York has a stipulation where they need to care for those who are vulnerable. And obviously, as you hear about food pantries expanding the demand on them, that need is pretty important. Also, we look with solidarity with the human community. What's the agenda item dealing, how does it impact society as a general, and then care for all of God's creation. So all of the ecological issues come in place there. So if there are the basic 7 reasons that drive all of our social positions as a church. The church brings to politics a consistent moral framework. All right? There is something that's objective about the moral framework that we bring that allows us to evaluate each proposal in light of what it does to humans and what it does to society. All right, in other cases, other people, particularly interest groups, will have some, it may be self-interest, it may be an agenda that they're moving forth. All right, they don't necessarily talk about what does this proposal do to people and what does it do to society. So we bring that consistent ethic, that framework to be able to measure legislation in that manner. And we also bring our experience serving the need of people. As we talked about, Catholic Charities does an amazing amount of service to the poor at your high schools. I know you do a lot of service projects. We talked about healthcare at the hospitals. Actually, there are 3 Catholic hospitals in in Syracuse, the diocese, Lourdes in Binghamton, St. Elizabeth's in Utica, and St. Joe's here in Syracuse. You, on that day, on March 19th, you are going to be a representative of the Catholic bishops of New York. And it's important that we remember that phrase from Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message. When we think about that, we need to remember we're church. Our job is to generate light, not heat. So that's going to gear the tone of our conversations between ourselves and the legislators. All right? It's important that we also have in the back of our minds that we're going to build relationships. If you think about it, whether we are successful today or not, the message we want to leave with them is we're not going home. We're not going to back off on this. We will be there. We will be there next year with the same agenda. When I first started lobbying, there was a top aide that worked for Senator Lombardi. And I had met him at one point, did the usual correspondence, and created a relationship. It was interesting, when I called the senator's office, I could always get through to him, and I always got good information because of the relationship. So this is what we're looking to do. Whomever we meet, we're going to build a relationship with. So taking down their name is an important thing, and if you think about it, after you leave, shoot them a quick handwritten thank you note. It says amazing things to people. This group knows what it's about. This group has its act together. Okay, stick to the bishop's agenda, the 5 objectives. And please, 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 and I know you won't, but I just have to say it, don't threaten. Every once in a while, there will be someone, not from our diocese, someone who will say, I'm not going to vote for you. I'm going to tell everybody I know I'm not going to vote for you. Well, they already know that. So it really doesn't work in our favor to kind of threaten. Gee, we're disappointed you've taken this position. We hope that at least you'll consider our positions. All right, so again, being there, making the statement is important. All right, our schedule, this really doesn't vary from year to year. We will get to Albany around 10 o'clock. All right, and the first thing we're going to do is go to our organizational team meetings. Look for signs that say Diocese of Syracuse meeting. All right, and from 11:15 to 1 o'clock, we will do all of these things. We will have our legislative appointments. We'll have the meeting to start with. The meeting, I'm going to explain a little more in detail in a slide or two, but the meeting is going to basically give you an opportunity to organize your thoughts with the other people. There will be a chair who will be designated. That chair will come together and say, okay, what types of things do you want to speak about, and how do we need to do that? So the chair will kind of guide you through that, and that takes you off of the concern about if you're tense about going in there. So there's an organization. You will have plenty of time to do this. I would suggest that you leave for your meeting early, like 20 minutes early, 25 minutes early, because you have to go up the elevators in the state office buildings. Because you, 1,000 other Catholics, and God only knows how many other groups are there lobbying that day, those elevators are jammed. So you need to take the time. Also, when you get there, you can always wait in the hall or wait in their office. But to be able to just relax and kind of get your breath and at least go in a calm, cool manner. A boxed lunch is going to be provided for you at no charge. So when you get done, there are a couple of things that will be happening. You're welcome to participate in these or not. I usually tell people if you have extra time and you're in the legislative office building, check out some of the other legislators that represent the diocese. Just go into their office and say, we know we don't have an appointment, we don't plan to meet with the legislator, but we'd like to sign the book, just to let them know how many people from the Diocese of Syracuse were there. All right, and sign in as Diocese of Syracuse, not necessarily your own location, because it's a bigger group. There will be a rosary procession over to the cathedral, which is across the street. And at 1:30, we will have Mass. The Cardinal will celebrate it along with the other 7 bishops of New York State. And after Mass, the buses will depart from Madison Avenue, which is on the side of the cathedral. We should be home around 5:30-ish. It depends on how many stops we take, how many people get lost during the stops, and all those other very human things. So you can make your plans along those lines. To prepare, what would I suggest that people do? One is to pray. And this is critical because what you're doing is a spiritual activity. Advocating for the vulnerable in our society is a spiritual activity. And if you think about it, before Jesus did anything major, before he began his public ministry, before the crucifixion, he spent time in solitude and prayer. So you need to kind of come to a sense of who you are and allow the fact that God is using you in this position. View the video. You may need to go over it again when it gets posted on YouTube. Also read the capsule sheets, and I have them here. For those who are viewing on YouTube, I will send these to you by email just before the day of the Public Policy Day. Practice saying what you're going to say before a mirror. I used to be a guidance counselor after I got done being a social studies teacher. When I would talk to kids about going for an interview, I would say, write down what it is, some issues, some questions you think people are going to ask you, and then practice saying them before a mirror. You are going to feel so awkward the first time you do it, maybe the second time. By the third time, it's going to be a piece of cake, because you've heard yourself saying the words, and you know where you're going to go. So it's a great technique. Please feel free to use it on any of your college interviews, but it's a great technique for preparing for Catholics in the Capitol. Also, I would say it's important that you dress to be taken seriously. Jeans and nobody's going to be able to wear cutoffs now, but jeans and a sweatshirt are not really going to be what's going to make an impression. So we go back to Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message. All right, we talked about our organizational meeting, which will begin at 10:15. When you check in, you will have been given a legislator and a time slot that you will be visiting with that legislator. What you need to do is look over the tables, and there will be tent cards, and tent cards are cardboard things that look like this folded on a table. It will have your legislator's name on that tent card. What I would ask you to do is sit down there. Once everybody is there, the chair will begin to call the meeting to order and begin to talk about what it is you're interested in and how the meeting with the legislator ought to go. Verify your appointment time. It's amazing. People forget. And nothing worse than having traveled all the way to Albany only to realize your appointment was 25 minutes ago and you missed it. So once you get to that meeting, what I tell people to do is talk to the other people who are in that group and verify the appointment time. Also verify the location of your legislator's office. And you may want to ask directions ahead of time so we're not taking up time. In the organizational meeting, you'll decide who's going to speak, what he or she will say. Not everybody needs to speak. Just being there is a type of witness. If you're not comfortable speaking, don't feel badly. You are there 100% as a witness, a physical witness. And if the time is short, you will have the chair will work with you to collapse the content. And I'll show you where that takes place. The personal touch is always important. All right, and quite frankly, most legislators are impressed by the fact that young people come to this because you're going to be voting for a long time. And once you participated in this experience of public policy, you're going to be sensitized to public policy issues. And as you grow older and have the opportunity to vote, you're going to vote and you're going to continue to be involved. So they want to make friends with you. They are always sensitive to their constituents. All right, that means they got elected by people in their district, the districts from which you come, who voted for them. They would like always to be reelected. So they need to get the pulse of what it is that people in their district are feeling, and also take the opportunity to share a personal story. If there's something about one of these issues that you have some personal experience from, either a friend of yours experienced it and you were able to kind of capture it and share it, that makes it more than an issue. Right now, those are only issues. If we share a personal story, an example, we put a face on it, and we remind them that these issues affect people and society in general. Okay, at appointment time, as I said before, arrive early because the elevators are going to be clogged. The first question the leader will ask after he or she says good morning or hello will be, how much time do we have? All right, because in some cases, you assume that you'll have as much time as you need. The legislator or perhaps the legislative aide with whom you will be working may not have that same agenda. So it's important that you know exactly how much time that you have. If you have a short period of time, that's where earlier I talked about collapsing the agenda and doing an abbreviated version of it. That's where that will come into play. So you're prepared for that possibility, and you don't end up saying, well, we got all this to say and we don't have any time to say it. Okay, the leader will serve as the chair for the meeting. Now, in some cases you will meet with the legislator, and in some cases you will meet with a staff member. Don't be upset if you meet with a staff member. Staff members can be just as important as legislators. In a lot of cases, they know the legislation, the ins and outs of the legislation, more intimately than the legislators may know. So it's important, as I talked to you about that legislative aide with whom I had a relationship who worked for Senator Lombardi, that relationship with the aide paid off big time whenever I was lobbying for Catholic schools. So you're there to build a relationship, so get their name. Get their name and be sure you shoot that little 2-sentence. Thank you for taking the time to meet with representatives of the Catholic community on Catholics in the Capitol Day on March 19th. We appreciate the time that you took to listen to us. Doesn't have to be exotic. During the appointment, stick to the bishop's agenda. 5 things. If you want to lobby about something else, come another day. That day is focus. All right? Be clear, concise, and as I mentioned before, be polite. We're going there to create light, not heat. If you have an example, use it. Tell the individual, the legislator, or the aide why we support or have problems with a proposal. It's not enough just to say, we think that you shouldn't pass this bill. Here's why. The most important piece of that whole discussion is why, because that's what's going to make a difference for them. So include that in what it is that you say. During the appointment, no one knows everything. If you're asked a question that you don't know about, don't panic. All you need to say is, let me have Father Vavonese get back to you. Then when you come back, let me know the legislator's name and the question. I will get an answer and mail a letter to them that explains the letter. So you don't need to get crazy if you don't know the answer, because you're not professional lobbyists. So it's okay to not to know something. Ask for the legislator's position on our agenda. All right? A legislator may respond to the leader in writing. He may say, well, we haven't taken a position yet. All right, sometimes that could be a dodge. Sometimes that could be the fact that he or she is in transition. So the response from the leader is, okay, once you take a position, would you send me a letter and explain it to me? So we're not going to let them off the hook at that point. If the legislator does not agree with you, and this happens, give him or her your most persuasive reasons. Don't argue. What I tell people to do is to switch strategies there. All right, this is important because we at least want to make the legislator know what's on our mind, why we think that. So I frequently will say, I understand that you're not in favor of this, but I would like an opportunity to have you at least hear why it is or isn't important to us. All right, all of a sudden you've taken the tension out of the interaction and you've created some space in which you can present your own arguments. Legislators do change their mind. Actually, I suspect that in the area of abortion, the legislators may in the next couple of years be changing their mind, because public opinion on abortion has changed in the past 2 years significantly. There are now more people pro-life than pro-choice. And I read 3 studies recently that support this. So in a variety of studies, we're seeing this very same thing. And basically, it's happening because we've been there for the long haul. So be aware of that, and they realize that too, so they have to be sensitive to that. Ask if he or she will at least think about our position when he or she begins to prepares to vote. Again, if the legislator doesn't agree, know that we're there for the long haul. We're going to be back, and we'll be back next year. One thing from St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God made it grow. If you think about it, that's exactly what the people who have been at Public Policy Day in the past have done. They have set the pro-life agenda, and we are now at the point of benefiting from all of their hard work. So each of us has a role to play, and it may not see fruition this year, but we're part of a chain, and we trust the fact that God brings about good. We're God's instrument. We never know how he's going to use us. And it becomes an act of faith to say, even though I don't know, even though I would like to see immediate action, I believe that you will bring good out of evil, and you will use my efforts on behalf of the gospel to bring about good. The agenda, and in a short time I'm going to have someone who works in each of these areas from our diocese to explain each of these to you, but the five-prong agenda that we're talking about is: 1, supporting pregnant women and opposing abortion expansion. New York State is considering the most liberal expansion of abortion, with many, many features of the bill that only bode poorly for the people of our state, and definitely the children of our state. But at the same time, we have to be pro-woman and pro-life. So we need to convey that reality to them. Preserving our Catholic schools, they will be talking about a type of tax credit. Secure sufficient funding for programs for vulnerable populations, for care of the poor. And then we will be talking about supporting humane treatment for the incarcerated individuals and support for equitable labor standards for farm workers. Again, we'll go into greater details when each of the persons who will present these to you comes to the podium. Watch for the email. About 10 days before, at this point I've got a week. I've extended that to 10 days. About 10 days before the event, I will start sending you daily emails. And the reason I do it is there is a horrendous amount of material. If I send the whole thing in one document, it's going to get lost. So what I do is break it into individual documents. One day I will send these issue papers. One day I will send your appointment. One day I will send the bus schedule. So you need to kind of tune in and talk to each other. Did you get the email about? All right. I would suggest that you print out the email statements. I would also suggest that you print these out. You may want to leave them with your legislator or legislative aide. It's a good way of doing it, because if you forget to say something, they've got it in writing. Share what it is you know with other people. Something to think about, and this is always moving for me, and that's why I share it. After the bombing of London, there was a picture of Christ with a statue of Christ with his hands extended. And in the bombing, his arms were broken off. And someone had put a sign at the foot of the statue: "Now we must become the arms and hands of Christ." And that's exactly what you're doing here. You are the arms and hands of Christ in a very concrete, real way. We're looking to Wednesday the 19th for our meeting together. I would like to take this opportunity on behalf of the bishop and all of us here at the diocese for thanking you and for thanking all of those who will view this video and come to Public Policy Day. I hope it is a very enriching day for all of you. As I mentioned earlier, we will be bringing in some of the people from the diocese who work with each of these issues to present them to you. The first is Mr. Joseph Slavic. Mr. Slavic is the president and CEO of Catholic Charities for the diocese, the group that provides the direct services to all of the vulnerable people in our one of the groups that provides the services for all of the vulnerable people in our diocese. And certainly he has a unique perspective as to what happens when the money for those vulnerable populations goes away. So I'd like to welcome Mr. Slavic. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here today to be part of our Catholics in the Capital program. This is an annual event that takes place every middle of March that the New York State Catholic Conference puts on, and it brings Catholics from all across the state to advocate on behalf of the issues that are near and dear to our church. You have briefing papers that will explain what those issues are, but those issues are developed by the Public Policy Committee of the New York State Catholic Bishops. So it's our responsibility to take that message forward to our local leaders and legislators in Albany. I'm here to touch on the issue paper that speaks to funding for vulnerable New Yorkers. This is an area where the human service agenda ties into this. Being in Catholic Charities, we do an awful lot of work with the state of New York in partnership in providing the poor and vulnerable of our state opportunities and care. The state has made a commitment to the protection of people in this state, especially those with special needs. In fact, in our state constitution, it requires the state to care for the poor and vulnerable. What we're basically asking the state to do is not renege on that commitment. Over the years, we have found funding has decreased in terms of our ability to provide necessary supports for the poor and vulnerable in the state. And we know that when budget time comes, decisions are made, and they're difficult decisions to be made, but what we're saying here is that we don't want the state or the human service agenda to shoulder the cuts that are going to be made or the decisions that are going to be made on behalf of our local leaders. So we also recognize that an increase in funding saves money in the long run. So we're going to be advocating for funding right along in a variety of areas. Providing services to vulnerable people in the least restrictive setting is beneficial and cost effective. Direct care workers are deserving of compensation at a level that reflects the value of the work they do. About 5 years ago, the state committed to providing our workers under state contract with a 2% increase in their salaries, and they have not given us that for the last 5 years. So our people are actually working for less money today than they were 5 years ago, based on all the increased costs that they have faced as families. So we're asking the state to renew that commitment and bring that funding forward. Keeping children with family members is generally preferable wherever possible. Our public-private partnership is necessary to meet the needs of the poor and vulnerable of our state. The church and other non-for-profit providers are willing to do their share, but the state has an obligation to step up as well. Savings from institutionally based care must be reinvested in community-based care for persons with mental illness and developmentally disabled in order to ensure proper services. The policy that the state is putting forward now is that they want to create what they're calling centers for excellence by combining their institutions into regional locations. And what it does, it's a tremendous impact not only on the individuals that reside there, but also the communities that these places are located in. So we're asking the state that if in fact this plan goes through, and I know that in our diocese, especially in the southern part of our diocese, a group of people got together and advocated on stopping that particular movement. They were going to close 2 institutions in the Binghamton area that I'm familiar with. And now they're not going to do that, but they are going to reduce the amount of beds that are in these 2 institutions. And what we're saying now, historically, our services to the mentally ill and developmentally disabled has always been behind. And what we're saying to them, if you're going to reduce the beds, the money that you save from those reductions ought to flow into the community with those individuals as they move into the community. So that's basically the theme of that particular issue. And then finally, justice demands that basic human needs must be met for all members of our society. You know, we're fortunate that we have a wonderful Pope now, Pope Francis, who is really advocating for the church to be part of and with the poor. And so this is our opportunity to bring forth that message as well to our state leaders. So I'm hoping you will join us, be part of that activity.
With me this morning is Lisa Hall, and Lisa is the director of the Respect Life Office for the Diocese of Syracuse. Lisa will spend some time this morning walking you through the Bishop's targeted agenda, pro-woman and pro-child. Pro-woman and pro-life.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Lisa, for being here.
Thanks, Father. I appreciate it, and thank each of you for being here, too. We really appreciate that. Just to give you a bit of background on the agenda and where things were last year as we're heading into this year and what we're looking for you to ask and talk to your assembly people and your senators about. In 2013, Governor Cuomo strongly promoted something called the Women's Equality Act. This act included abortion expansion as part of a 10-point agenda. This bill would embed unlimited abortion license through all 9 months of pregnancy for virtually any reason into New York State statute. It would also allow non-doctors to perform abortions. Last year in 2013, the Assembly passed the full Women's Equality Act, including the abortion expansion piece, while the Senate passed 9 of the 10 points individually, leaving out abortion expansion, and then narrowly defeated a hostile amendment that attempted to add the abortion expansion piece back in. So that gives you a bit of the picture. The Assembly voted for it in full, and the Senate narrowly defeated the abortion expansion piece last year. So we have our work cut out for us in this. But I feel fully confident that we can talk to our Assembly people and our senators and really get them to see what is truly a pro-woman and pro-life agenda. So in 2014, we'll fast forward to just in January, Governor Cuomo repeated his call to pass his full Women's Equality Act, including the abortion expansion piece. At the same time, he significantly decreased funding for the Maternity and Early Childhood Foundation. This foundation supports alternatives to abortion for pregnant women. So you can see it's kind of not very balanced in terms of really trying to be pro-woman and pro-life, and that's what we're seeking to do, is to achieve some balance in this situation. So we need to ask our Assembly members and our senators for 2 main things. One, we want to support pregnant women through the Maternity and Early Childhood Foundation by restoring its funding and increasing its funding. And 2, we want to oppose abortion expansion in our state while supporting bills that will truly benefit women. 9 individual bills have been introduced in both the Assembly and the Senate. Really good bills, excellent bills, such as aiding victims of domestic violence and human trafficking. These women need our help. And the bishops fully support each of these 9 individual bills that have been introduced. So we want to make that clear to our Assembly people and our senators too. You may hear in the Assembly, because back in January, Assembly members did vote to pass the full Women's Equality Act again, with all 10 points, including abortion expansion. But we still want to urge our Assembly members to rethink this. Go back, look at the 9 individual bills that have been introduced, and ask them to pass these 9 bills that truly will benefit women. So we need to ask our Assembly people and our senators for those 2 main things. I also want to bring up another point about what the Women's Equality Act does not do. In your sessions talking to the Assembly members and the senators, you may hear that the Women's Equality Act, this abortion expansion piece, simply seeks to codify federal law, existing federal law. Well, it does not do that, and I'll tell you some of the ways it does not do that. Currently, in existing federal law, we have a ban on the practice of a partial birth abortion, one method of partial birth abortion. This current law that the governor is proposing has nothing in terms of a ban on any type of abortion. We also have a prohibition on taxpayer funding through the Hyde Amendment at the federal level. Well, there's no such ban to taxpayer funding of abortion in the Women's Equality Act. So we want to make sure to point that out to our representatives as well. Thirdly, there is no conscience protection in the Women's Equality Act that is really solid and can be seen as holding, that people, health providers can stand firmly behind. At the federal level, there are many levels of conscience protection provided for doctors and other healthcare providers. So if they're trying to make the argument that we're merely trying to bring our law in New York State up to the level of federal law, we would say, no, that's not true. There are many ways that federal law has advanced. And as Bishop Cunningham well said last year, codification is a 2-way street. It goes both ways. So to end up, I want to just say reasonable regulations on abortion and medical technology, being able to see the baby in the womb, really have significantly advanced since the 1973 Roe versus Wade decision. And we should not go back to those times before then in New York State. So thank you guys so much.
Joining me now is Mrs. Deborah Bellanti. Deborah is the Assistant Superintendent of Schools for the Catholic Schools. She'll talk about one of the strategies that the bishops have targeted as a strategy for preserving Catholic schools. Debbie, thank you for joining us.
You're
Appreciate
very welcome.
having you
It's
each
my
year.
pleasure to be here this morning. As Father said, I'm the Assistant Superintendent for the Diocese of Syracuse Catholic Schools, and it's a real privilege to be in that position. I wanted to talk to you just a little bit this morning about a topic that I know is near and dear to all of our hearts, and that is preserving our Catholic schools. Obviously, your families have made that choice for you because they feel that that's the right choice for you and for your family. But we need to make sure that we have Catholic schools to continue to attend. So as we take a look at our Pope Francis and what he has said, his description about Catholic schools, he indicates that Catholic schools, which always strive to join their work of education with the explicit proclamation of the gospel, are a most valuable resource for the evangelization of culture. And then Pope Benedict indicates that no child should be denied his or her right to an education in faith, which in turn nurtures the soul of a nation. But as we know, Catholic schools are facing a continuous economic crisis. A significant number of schools have been forced to close. Most recently in the Diocese of Buffalo, several of those schools were notified that they will be closed at the end of June. So, we have to really be careful about that, and we need to do all that we can to preserve our Catholic schools. But the problem is that fewer families are able to afford the dual burden of their school taxes and tuition. Think about it, that school taxes, your parents pay school taxes, and yet in addition to that, they pay the tuition that they have to pay for you to attend your school. So the accessibility to a faith education for all children is being threatened because of this economic crisis. Well, what can we do about that? Well, there's a proposal that's been put forth by Senators Golden and Assemblyman Cusack, and that is the Education Investment Incentives Act. Previously, when I have given this talk, I've talked to the group, just like you, about several issues that we could focus on to preserve Catholic schools. But this year, we really want to make this one issue the priority. So when you go to Public Policy Day and you're thinking about an issue that affects your Catholic schools, this is the one. We need the Education Investment Incentives Act passed. So, and what does that do? It helps support all families regardless of where their children attend school. That will be important to the legislators because they want to come across certainly as being fair. So this is not just a Catholic initiative, although it will help our Catholic schools tremendously, but it will also help public schools. So they can support it because it is a fair act. And it is needed, specifically needed though, to help keep Catholic schools affordable for our families. The Senate has twice passed the Education Investment Act, and the majority of Assembly members have co-sponsored the bill, but it is not passed there yet. So we want this included in our state budget. We want this education investment tax credit included. Why? Because it will provide a dollar-for-dollar tax credit against up to 75% of the tax liability for donations made to educational scholarship organizations, for scholarships for children to use in our non-public, religious or independent schools. Also for public schools and their public school districts, for special programs that are in their schools to help their budgets. For nonprofit organizations for the purpose of providing instruction and programming to schools. For local education funds and for pre-kindergarten programs. This education investment tax credit will give every teacher a tax credit for their out-of-pocket purchases for classroom supplies. I'm sure your teacher will tell you that she spends a lot of her money for classroom supplies. So this will certainly benefit all of our teachers, both our Catholic teachers and the public school teachers. So how do we keep Catholic schools affordable? Well, the Education Investment Tax Act is needed to help keep the Catholic schools affordable for families, which will in turn relieve pressure on the state budget. That's important for our legislators to know that. The tax credit will enable individuals and businesses to increase their charitable giving to public schools and scholarship funds that help send their children to independent and religious schools. The specifics of the bill are that this measure provides an equal level of support for public and non-public schools. I can't continue to say that more and more because that's going to have to be the focus. They'll ask, why should we support this bill? It's helping Catholic schools. No, it's helping both. So that's really important that when you are speaking to a senator or as an assembly person, that you are certain to mention that. The bill is a win-win-win. Public schools win through private gifts to offset their costs. Families win by having a true choice in where to send their children to school, especially low and middle income families. And taxpayers win by allowing religious and independent schools to stay open, saving billions of tax dollars per year. Without this tax credit, more and more families will be forced to enroll their children in public schools, which will increase the cost to the state, which will then worsen the financial crisis lawmakers are trying to solve. That's also an important fact to present to the lawmakers. So what can we do? We need to urge the lawmakers to enact this bill into a law as part of the state budget. Presently, the 3 of the assemblymen in our district are not co-sponsors of this bill. They include Assemblyman Magnarelli, Assemblyman Sturpey, and Assemblyman Roberts. So if you are speaking to those men, it would be my suggestion that you ask them to reconsider their position on this bill, and if perhaps they could vote to pass it in their budget. You can remind them that Catholic and other religious and independent schools educate nearly 500,000 children, saving New York State taxpayers $9 billion each year. And that's an important fact for them to consider because of the impact that that will have on their state budget.
Joining me right now is Paul Welch. Paul is the director of the Office of Social Concerns for the Diocese of Syracuse. Paul will talk on 2 of the items that we will be dealing with, care for the humane treatment for the incarcerated, and also fair wages for farm workers. Paul, once again, it's very great to have you with us, and thank you for all your efforts.
Thanks, Father Chuck. Now, when we go to Albany, and we're going to Albany, we carry with us the gospel. We're Christians, we're Catholics, so that's the motivation we're going there. Now, we're going to bring facts, figures, and the perspective, but the wellspring of our beliefs we're going to share them. We're going to share them. And for you that don't read the Bible every day, I'm sure you read it on Sundays, you hear that. Matthew 25:31 gives the 6 ways to go to heaven. You know, in any religion, that's kind of like the bottom line. And when you go back, I'll tell you one of the ways. I was in prison and you visited me. Jesus Christ made very clear, anyone in prison, he's there with them. And therefore, humane treatment for incarcerated individuals has a pretty high standard, it seems to me. We're treating Jesus Christ in those prisons. Now, these guys and women, they've done bad things in many cases, and but that isn't the issue. They're human beings, and Jesus Christ is with them in the cell. And we have to be with them in the cell. We don't go in, this is probably one of the 6 ways that we least do anything about. But now let me give you some facts and figures. This will give you some background on what we're talking about when we talk about incarcerated people. United States is number 1 in incarcerated people per capita. No other country in the world puts as many people in jail per capita as we do. Whoa! You're talking about China, you're talking about Iran, you're talking about Russia. We're number 1. That's not something to be so proud of. However, at least in New York State, over the last decade or so, we've started to retrench. We had about 72,000 people in prisons, just in state prisons, not counting our jails or our county penitentiaries, just in state prisons, about 72,000. It's down to around 55, roughly 55,000. And because we've really started to rethink one of our wars. America is not good at wars. Since the Vietnam War, we have not had a good mentality going to war. It's been horrible. Our popes have spoken against it, and yet somehow policy just keeps going on. We have a war on drugs, and it has thrown tens, hundreds, millions of people into jail. Not doing a lot of good, but we're rethinking that. And you'll see that in all sorts of, our drug policy, our imprisonment policy is changing, and now we're trying to ride that crest and change how we deal with people in jails. A lot of black and brown people in jails, disproportionate amount of people. And you'll see in various studies, white people deal drugs or get drugs, they don't go to jail nearly what a black or a brown person dealing drugs or using drugs goes to jail. That hopefully is changing. Hopefully is changing. What we're looking at is, as the title says, humane treatment of people in jail. Number one, if you're aged, sick, or dying, let's be rational. Let's be rational. These people should not, in many cases, are not any threat to society, yet we keep them in jail. Why? Well, they committed a crime a long time ago, and they got to pay the price. We're keeping them in jail at $55,000, $60,000. They're way past, and I'm sure they repented in the vast majority of their cases for the sins and the crimes they committed. Aged, sick, and dying people ought to be a separate category in parole and be allowed to go back and die or be with their own people. That'd be one thing. The second thing, huge thing, mentally ill people. Some studies, most studies show about 50%, this is staggering, 50% of the people in jails and prisons suffer some sort of mental illness. It can be very serious or it could be not so serious. So, but roughly 50%. I think it's 46% for our state and 56% nationally, but it's around 50%. In the 50s, we had one psychiatric bed for every 300 people in our community. Okay. Not necessarily, those beds weren't necessarily good beds, but we had one for 300. Now we have one for every 3,000. What we found, when you look at history, in the 1840s, a wonderful woman named Dorothea Dix. Look her up, her history on Google, whatever. I mean, women have been transformative for our society. Absolutely transformative. She looked at, back then, you threw the crazy people, mentally ill people in jail. They're acting bizarrely, throw them in jail. She made an effort and said, this is wrong. People are sick. You treat them as if there's an illness. You treat them as if they're Jesus Christ. And she made a move in our country that started to treat mentally ill people as a mental illness, as a sickness, not as a crime, but as a sickness. What we've happened in the 50s, or actually in the 60s and 70s, we cleared out, because the conditions in many of our psychiatric hospitals were horrible, horrible. People were warehoused in these facilities. So we cleared them out, and many of them ended up on the streets. We didn't create what they call community services or community facilities that were adequate to handle the number of people that were hurting. So guess what? They end up back in jail. We're back where we were with Dorothea Dix had the fight to make our prisons humane and take the mentally ill out of our prisons. And there's a particular focus that we want you to take with the legislators. We want to talk about humane treatment in jail. We want you to talk about the aged, the sick, the elderly, prisoners, and really letting them out. Number two, what has developed is something called SHUs, Special Housing Units, solitary confinement. We have roughly 4,500 persons a day, 45 people that Jesus Christ is with, that are put into solitary confinement in our state prisons, 4,500. They stay on average around 90 days. Challenge I give to you, go into your bathroom, small bathroom, if you have a small bathroom in your house, sit in there for 1 hour. 1 hour. Put all the shades down, you can turn a light on, but just sit on the toilet seat, if you will. And that's it. That's 1 hour approximating solitary confinement. 90 days? 90 days? Whoa, on average. Most of the violations, most of the reasons why people are in solitary in an SHU, a special housing unit, is because they disobeyed the rules. Not necessarily, if there's violent behavior, you got to segregate them. You got to segregate them. But if it's breaking the rules, let's rethink this. I mean, what kind of punishment that is? There should be some consequences for breaking the rules. No argument. The correction officers need leverage with the prisoners, clearly. But to have special housing units as your answer, I break a rule, I go to a special housing unit, maybe for 90 days? Whoa. It's actually 4,300 each day is what people put in there. In New York State especially, I don't know what's going on. And prisons are one of those institutions none of us have been in. We don't know what's going on. And it's hard to tell what's going on because, you only have a few sources of information. But we're getting that increase of special housing units has increased 46% in the last 4, 5, 6, 7 years. Almost a 50% increase and we're 37% above the national average for use of these special housing units. We need an investigation. We need people to go into these jails. And we're not saying the correctional officers are bad people. They're not. They're good people. They could be our uncles, our fathers, our mothers. But if you set up a system where there is only limited options for somebody that disobeys a rule, well, we got to rethink that. We got to rethink that seriously, and we got to rethink it seriously when 50% of the people in jail have some mental illness. They say the statistics I saw, 16% have serious mental illness, like they're psychotic, don't know reality, are really way out there. So about 16% are really tough cases, whereas 50% have some form. Informal polls, formal polls say, when you talk with prisoners, something like more than half, about 60%, get some sort of treatment for mental illness in the jail, some sort. So that means 40% get nothing. Nothing. So what we have to do, there was a law passed in 2008 that was supposed to look at this mental illness, how do we treat these people in jails? I didn't get a lot of feedback that it was working. That's something that we got to go and we got to say, listen, are we opening up the jails? Are we opening up by the sense that outside people, outside the criminal justice system itself, go in and talk with prisoners, find out what's going on. Talk with correction officers. That there be a commission to look at what is going on in the jails. Humane treatment for Jesus Christ. That's what we're talking about. Humane treatment for Jesus Christ. He may not look like our picture of Jesus Christ, but the gospel tells us that's what it is. So go challenge your legislators to answer some of these things. You don't have to get every one of those facts and figures. but just remembering Jesus Christ is in those jails. And the other thing, there are groups in our community, and jail ministry in here in Onondaga County has done marvelous work with people in our jail, not a prison, in jail. They're innocent until proven guilty, but they connect with prisoners, and they can tell you a lot. So if you have more to learn, jail ministry locally is a great group. Thanks so much. Godspeed. Do a great job.
Paul, thank you for your passion and for your wide sense of information. You've given us a new way to look at the whole issue of incarceration. And now I'd like to ask Paul if he would turn his attention to equitable payment for farm workers. Paul?
Thanks so much, Father Chuck. Similar to the imprisoned persons, look up Matthew 25:31, and you'll see there, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. How does that fit with farm workers? I mean, why are they strangers? Vast majority of farm workers are Hispanics from Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador. Vast majority. In our community, in the Diocese of Syracuse, there's roughly 12,000 farm workers, and once again, the vast majority being Hispanic from those areas. Some Jamaicans, some Haitians, but by and large, most of them from those countries of Central America and Mexico. And they're strangers. They don't speak the language. They speak Spanish. They, in many cases, are undocumented, which means they are illegal here. They're illegal here. That's very interesting. These are very people that are really scared. They've come here to get money for their own families who are desperately in need. And you say, many people say, why are they here? Because Americans don't, natural Americans, native-born Americans, don't do farm worker work anymore. It is incredibly hard. It is incredibly difficult. Tom Rivers, a newspaper reporter out of Batavia Daily News, he took the ag beat, the agriculture beat, and he went out into the fields, and he wanted to share with the readers really what it was like out in the fields. And he said, listen, out in the fields is harder than running a marathon, and I've done them both. And the marathon is much easier than cutting cauliflower. He's got a book, Farm Hands. If you get a chance, look it up. Farm Hands, read the little segments. He picks the different crops. Farmers desperately need these Hispanic people to come and work. Dairy farmers have no way to get foreign legal labor. There is no, for year-round, there is no way for them to get foreign legal workers. There is a way for vegetable farmers and fruit farmers to get legal farm workers. There is no way for dairy workers, dairy farms. You have 9,000 of the 12,000 farm workers work on dairy farms, and the vast majority of those would be Hispanics. These are people that come up here, desperately need jobs, and the farmers desperately need them. Desperately need them. How many of you have picked in the fields? Not me. Oh, I did for 2 days one time. 2 days. We don't do it anymore. We used to do it. The Italians, the Irish, go out there, and especially Italians, because they were more swarthy than us Irish guys, and we get sunburned. But that fit. We don't do that anymore. Americans don't pick, aren't farm workers, and we need these farm workers. And we bring them in, and they are in, at best, a limbo. They are afraid. And what we have to do, just like the prison population, these are strangers in need. Jesus Christ is with each one of these workers. He accompanies each worker into the field for really, really hard work. Back about 15 years ago, they passed minimum wage, finally, that there was some floor for the wages that farm workers get. And we've been working ever since to try to increase the protections. Farm workers and domestic workers were excluded back in the 30s, in the 1930s. That's way back, way back. FDR was the president, tremendous liberal, and we were in a horrible recession, depression, horrible. You've probably read about it in the history books. He passed labor laws that would protect the people on the bottom, on the very bottom, minimum wage, labor standards, and all that. To get that legislation through, he had to make a deal with the southern federal legislators. This is the heart of segregation back then, heart of segregation. And back then, the deal was exclude the industry, farm workers, domestics, blacks were in, and we'll pass your legislation. Otherwise, it's not going anywhere. FDR, being a politician that he is, took the deal, passed fair labor standards, excluding farm workers, excluding domestic workers. We have operated under that system ever since. The Southern segregationist stamp is still on our legislation, excluding farm workers. Domestics, I think, are have made progress. In New York State, we've made some progress. We got them the minimum wage. However, these are the issues. They're in your packets. These are key that you raise these with the legislatures when you meet them. Overtime pay. You know, the people that are mad at Hispanics for taking Americans' jobs, well, let's institute overtime pay and see if any Americans will stand up and get out in those fields. Give them an advantage. Same thing, day of rest. They have no day of rest. The farmer, if farmer needs them, you get out there. Now, many of these workers on their own will work 7 days a week because their families need them. They need the money. They have to send it back. But we have to give them the option. If they're exhausted, they say, time out. I need a day of rest. Okay? So they establish a day of rest. Doesn't have to be Sunday. And he can stagger them. They can stagger it among the migrants, you know. I think, and allow farmers to do that. Collective bargaining. Now think of yourself. Think of Jesus Christ. Think of yourself, and you got a Hispanic farm worker in the huddle with you, and there's something egregious. Maybe they're spraying pesticides, and these guys have to go out in the middle of these chemicals and have to work. And they say, no, I don't want to do that. If it's one guy, if it's one woman, they'll fire them. They'll send them out. I'm sorry, we'll get somebody else to come in. However, if they come together, it's like you guys. If you're being abused in school, if you come together and petition whoever your teacher is, then that has a lot more force than if it's just one person going up complaining. Farm work is probably the most dangerous job, or one, at least it's right up there, one of the most dangerous jobs. And you need a collective unit. You can call it a union and call it something else, but you need a collective unit to stand together and say, listen, conditions have to change. Employers, they say this on the sheet, unemployment, workman's comp, employers don't pay, farmers don't pay into that. That's terribly odd. I thought that was universal. And some public health coverage programs don't cover farm workers. These are the most vulnerable people in our society, and public health isn't covering it. So I ask you, when you go, remembering, really, Jesus Christ is in the fields. He's working every day. He told us that. And if we believe it, we better believe it, because that's how we're getting to heaven, if we want to go. And not only talk to your legislators, but there's probably a farm near you. Probably is. And I would suggest we're trying to connect Catholic parishes, Catholic people with farm workers. And you need somebody who speaks Spanish, but at Bishop Grimes, there's got to be some real good Spanish speakers, right? Spanish classes, really great Spanish speakers. Go out to the Hispanic, meet them, say hello, bring them something to eat. Just say we're friends, we're fellow Christians. More times than not, we're fellow Catholics. So you're defending, you're standing up for these workers that cannot stand up. Do your best. Jesus Christ is with you.
I'd like to take a moment to thank the students from Bishop Grimes, all of our speakers, Mrs. Julie Moss, and this morning. Also, for those of you who will be viewing this video, thank you for taking the time to prepare for Catholics in the Capitol. Certainly, if you have any questions, please feel free to shoot me an email. You can do that by sending the email to publicpolicy@syrdio.org. That's publicpolicy@syrdio.org. And look for your email instructions. Please remember to pray as you prepare for this very important day. Thank you so much. Goodbye now.